Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my mid-month wrap up. So after slumping pretty hard in May and June, I don't want to jinx anything, but I seem to be doing very well in July. I have 7 books to talk to you guys about today. I'm very surprised that I've managed to read so much, honestly. I didn't even realize until a couple of days ago how much I've actually been reading. That being said, I did both host and of course participate in the 48-hour bookathon that just happened. So I did actually manage to complete 3 books just during that. Now, as usual, this video will not contain any of my monthly reading statistics. All of that will come at the end of the month. And that being said, let us get into our reviews. So the first book I finished in the month of July was The Start of Me and You by Emery Lord. This was on my June Bookopoly TBR and I think I was around 100 pages into it at the end of the month and I finished it off in July. This is a young adult contemporary and it is also on my list of these books will self-destruct in 12 months. Young adult contemporary is not something that I read a lot of anymore. I do enjoy it when I do pick it up, but generally speaking, there's not a lot about it that actually interests me to pick it up. But this one I actually really ended up enjoying and I gave it 4 stars. In fact, just gonna throw that out there, all of the books that I've read so far in July have been 3 or 4 stars, so it is kind of like an average to good reading month quality wise so far. So in this story we follow a girl called Paige, and Paige's boyfriend died 1 year ago in a swimming accident. Now since then, Paige has felt unable to move on because every time that she experiences any type of happiness, she feels extreme guilt, like she should be in mourning, even though her and her boyfriend were only together for around 2 months. So to combat this, as Paige is entering into a new school year, she makes a plan of things that she can do to kickstart her life again. Now this includes really basic things like socializing and going to a party, and it also includes things like joining extracurricular activities, but one of the things on her list is to date a boy, and not just any boy, specifically her long-term crush, Ryan, who has just broken up with his long-term girlfriend. So pretty much everything that Paige starts to do is designed to bring her closer to this boy Ryan. However, in the process of this, she actually gets close to his cousin Max, who is nothing like Ryan. He's really nerdy, he's pretty clever, but throughout the course of this book, Paige starts to reevaluate her plan from the beginning of the year. Now there are other things going on here as well. Paige is closest to her grandmother, and her grandmother has been dealing with the effects of Alzheimer's over the last, I think it's just over a year, and there's a lot of talk in here about her relationship with her grandmother. So like I said, gave this 4 stars, actually really enjoyed it. It was really cute and it was really sweet. It is kind of like a standard young adult contemporary in that it doesn't deal with extremely serious topics. We do have a lot of topics of grief in here, and also things like losing a family member that's really close to you, because even though Paige's grandmother is still alive, she does have Alzheimer's, and that unfortunately means that you start to lose your loved ones while they're still with you. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this. I got really into the romance. I thought it was really cute, it was really sweet. I didn't realize how attached I was to it until we got to the point that you have in kind of every contemporary story where everything seems to be going well and then we have a little bit of conflict and things start to go badly, and as soon as we got to that area of conflict, I was upset. You know, I wanted everything to go back to normal, and by the time I got to the end of this, I found that I had actually really enjoyed it. There is a sequel to this. I'm not sure if I'm going to read it because contemporary series are not something that I usually keep up on. However, if I am looking for a light, cute contemporary in the future, I may consider picking up the sequel to this one. I then read a book that I'm now sick of talking about because I didn't particularly enjoy it and I just want it to be over. So thankfully this will be, I think, the last time I need to mention it in a video, and that is The Farthest Shore by Ursula K. Le Guin. So I am a co-host of the Le Guin Along, which is a read-along of this entire thing, hosted by Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction, and the book for June, I think, was The Farthest Shore, which is the 3rd book in the series. Now, the first book in this series follows a young wizard called Ged who is particularly talented with magic, and because of this he is sent to a magic school where he is showing off in front of his classmates, and he accidentally releases this shadowy beast thing that he then has to go and track down. Now every book in this series is really short. I haven't read one that's over 150 pages yet, but my god do they feel so long. The Farthest Shore in particular follows Ged again, and it is much later in his life. A prince comes to him and tells him that in the outer reaches of the world, magic is disappearing. So Ged and the prince go out together to find out what's happening to magic and bring back an equilibrium in the world. So I gave this one 3 stars because I do feel like this series has a lot of merit. The first book was published in the 60s, I believe. So this series does contain a lot of the cornerstones of fantasy and tropes and settings and devices that were used for the first time in this series. However, reading them now as a modern audience, they're just not very compelling at all. The stories are very moralistic, the plots are very basic. I've had a different problem with every book in this series. With the third one in particular, I found that the plot was very good, which is something that was missing from the first 2 books in this series. However, this time around, I felt that it was particularly overwritten, and because of that, I couldn't really get into the story. I'm really sad that I'm not enjoying this series because I was looking forward to reading it. I'm more interested in classic fantasy now that I read a lot of modern fantasy. I want to be reading the classics to see where things have come from, and I feel like this series definitely holds a lot of merit in that regard, and that it is a building block for modern fantasy as we know it. I just think that with how far fantasy has come, it's not a very compelling read. I then finally moved into my July TBR and I started with Children of the Whales Volume 5 by Abby Umeda. This is the 5th installment of a fantasy manga series that follows a 14, I think, year-old boy called Chakaro, who is the archivist on the Mud Whale. Now, the Mud Whale is this big island that floats along on the Sea of Sand, and the citizens of the Mud Whale have never met anybody else from outside of their community. They have absolutely no concept of the outside world. They just live on this isolated island where they've never met another living soul or have any idea about anything outside of this Mud Whale. Now, things start to change in this series when they go out on a scouting mission to one of the islands they pass, and they find a girl there, and this like throws the world wide open for them. Where I'm up to in volume 5, we're learning a lot more about the world. Early on in the series, you meet people from another country, but we've just had another country introduced in volume 5, and the thing that I particularly liked about this one is that we also got a little bit more information about the history of the Mud Whale, as well as why the Mud Whale is there, like how these people have gone this long without encountering another living soul and things like that. The thing that interests me the most about this series is the outside world and everything that's going on outside of that, because it's not like normal society, but it is more like a normal society on the outside of the Mud Whale. So I do find it really interesting how real world aspects and also fantasy elements exist in this world when you are outside the perspective of the residents on the Mud Whale. My favorite thing about this series, and the main reason I picked it up, is that the art style in here is absolutely beautiful, and that definitely continues throughout. It does have a really good plot line as well and some great characters. We also found out a little bit more about my favorite character in this series, who is Oni, in this installment, and I'm really excited to see how that is going to develop throughout the rest of the series, and I believe that I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I picked up The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and this one took me a little bit by surprise. However, if I'd have actually thought about it before going into this book, it wouldn't have actually surprised me all that much. So this is on my Bookopoly TBR to read a dystopian, because this is a post-apocalyptic zombie story. Now, me just saying that this is a zombie story, you guys have probably automatically assumed that this is a horror book or has horror elements, and you are 100% right, but my dumbass did not even connect those dots, and so I was a little bit surprised at how many horror aspects were in here. But then obviously I thought about it and was like, yeah, you know what, I fully should have expected that. So this book was also a little bit different than I thought, because I thought that the girl with all the gifts was a child who had the power to turn people into zombies or cure them. However, the girl in this story, who is the main character Melanie, actually is a zombie. So this book takes place 20 years after the breakdown, which is the zombie apocalypse, and it starts off in this military base that has been created with the sole purpose of performing experiments on these zombie children. So these children are a little bit different because they do not exhibit the behaviors of the normal zombies that are called hungries in this world, because they have the ability to form rational thoughts. So they've been put into this isolated learning environment where they have teachers who teach them just like a standard school curriculum, and we also have a scientist on hand who takes them out of this environment occasionally and dissects them to see how their brains work in comparison to the adult hungries. Now, we have a lot of issues of morals in here as well, because Melanie is a zombie. However, she also has capability for rational thought. So where do human rights come into this? Like, should she be afforded human rights when she isn't technically alive? And that that is kind of not the main conflict, but definitely an underlying theme in this story. We also have a larger cast of main characters in here. We have Melanie, the scientist, is one of the main characters who is pursuing a cure. We also have a military sergeant who has a history of fighting on the streets during and after the breakdown. We have a younger soldier who has absolutely no concept of what society was like before the breakdown, and then we have Melanie's teacher. So something that also surprised me about this is that at some point in this story it turns into your typical zombie survivalist novel where all of these main characters end up on the road and having to survive until they can get to one of these safe havens that humanity has established. So it's pretty much a constant conflict between all of these characters who have conflicting opinions on zombies and the zombie children and what they should do about them, and specifically what they should do about Melanie. The thing that I really enjoyed about this was the scientific elements, which makes sense because you guys did recommend this to me based on my love of logic-based and heavily science-based sci-fi, and I really loved learning about this zombie virus. I was a little bit disappointed to discover that it does kind of turn into a typical zombie survivalist novel, and I don't think that there was anything too outlandish about the zombie virus in particular and how it spread and how it spawns and things like that. This book is quite heavily gory as well. Obviously that makes sense because the thing about zombies is that they eat people, but we also have graphic talks of dissection and things in here as well. I am slightly squeamish, so that did get to me just a little bit, but not enough for me to stop reading this book. And something that's kind of great about this is that it does have a little bit of an unpredictable ending that I did enjoy. So overall I gave this 4 stars. I enjoyed it a lot. With the amount of people who really love this and have excellent things to say about this book, I did expect to enjoy it a little bit more, but I did have a very positive reading experience of this, and I'm excited to read the sequel, which I don't think is a sequel. I think it's either a companion or a prequel, but the synopsis for that is kind of vague, so I'm very intrigued. So for the 3 books that I read during the Bookopolis film, the first one was an ebook, and that was A Sacrifice in the Smoke by Jessie Elliott and KJ Sutton. This is the 4th and currently final installment in the 1st volume of the Charlie Travesty series. So this is a serialized novel. The 4th part that I read was only around 100 pages, and this series tells the story of a young vampire princess called Charlie Travesty. Now in this world, vampires go through something called an awakening around their 23rd birthday. So the beginning of this series is leading up to Charlie's awakening, and what happens during an awakening is that a vampire will go to sleep, and when they wake up their eyes will have changed colour, and the colour of their eyes denotes which sector of the city they are going to be living in. So the catalyst for this series is that Charlie goes through her awakening and her eyes are a different colour than anybody expected them to be. So part 4 in particular was not my favourite installment. I did still give it 4 stars. It was a low 4 stars though. My favourite installment in the series overall is definitely the 3rd one, but my favourite character, who is Noah, was quite heavily present in the 4th one, which I enjoyed, and also the way that this leaves off was incredibly intriguing. Like, something bad happens and it seems like it might be okay, but like I'm not sure, like, to what extent do I trust the characters in this series? But overall I have really enjoyed reading the Charlie Travesty serial as a whole. It's pretty fast paced, it has quite a bit of romance in there, we also have mystery elements, and as usual I did find it incredibly compelling and addictive. My issue with the 4th installment in particular is that it felt like too much action. Like, it kind of felt like one thing after another after another after another. However, as well as that, it has also been a whole month at least since I read the 3rd installment, so it is possible that if I'd have read it straight off the back of the 3rd installment I would have enjoyed it a little bit more, because I felt like with this 4th one, with me taking such a long break, I needed a little bit more time to get reacquainted with the characters and what was actually happening in the plot. I then read another young adult contemporary, Who Am I? And this one was The Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds and illustrated by Chris Priestley. So I did listen to the audiobook at the same time as reading this, because this book is in a format that I'm very uncomfortable reading, and that is that it is told completely in verse. So this is a format that I don't typically reach for. I'm not a huge fan of poetry or anything told in verse, so I felt like listening to the audiobook while I was reading this definitely helped, because it gives you the flow, and it is narrated by Jason Reynolds himself. So this was an incredible, poignant story that while I was listening to it, I wasn't loving it. Like, I was enjoying it a lot, but I was kind of like, this is so-so, like, it deals with an important topic, but enjoyment wise and how it's constructed, not 100% feeling it. However, by the time we got to the end, I really loved this. I gave it 4 stars in total. This is the story of a young man whose brother has just been shot, and so now he has to follow follow 3 rules, and the 3 rules are don't cry, don't snitch, and get revenge. So the majority of this story takes place in an elevator as this young man has taken his brother's gun and is heading out to kill the man that killed his brother. While he is in the elevator, however, the elevator does stop at every single floor, and on every single floor a dead person gets in that is somebody that he has known, whether it's a family member, a friend, somebody he's known in passing, and they just have a conversation with him. So the thing that I really loved about this is how the plot is cyclical. Everything focuses on these 3 rules that are don't cry, don't snitch, get revenge, and how this is a damaging cycle that needs breaking, and the way that this has led to innocent people dying, it's led to a constant cycle of gun violence. And by the time we got to the end and how everything came full circle, I just really loved it, and I just thought that it conveyed a very important message and was also quite emotive as well. There's no point throughout this that I felt like I was going to cry or anything, but I did definitely feel like this was impactful, and I would recommend, if you haven't checked it out yet, the audiobook is only 1 hour and 45 minutes, which I was shocked at how short it is. So it's definitely a book that you could read in one sitting, and yeah, I would recommend it. And then the final book that I've read so far in July is Stop in the Name of Pants by Louise Renison, which was another 4-star read for me. I did listen to the audiobook of this as well. I know I hardly ever listen to audiobooks, but I pretty much listen to 2 back to back. But I like the audiobooks of this series because they are narrated by Louise Renison, who is the author. So this is my favorite series from childhood. However, I believe that the last book was released when I was 16 or 17, and I just never got around to reading it. So over the last 3 years, I have been rereading this entire series so that I can read the final book for the last time. Now, this is a young adult coming of age story that follows a girl called Georgie Nicholson, and it is literally just a coming of age story. It's about her life, her friends, puberty, boys, and all of that stuff, and it is told completely in diary entries. Now, these books are hilarious, and I was worried going into this series, a lot older than I was when I started it, that I would find it quite juvenile and not funny anymore, and I can 100% say that this series is still hilarious. I will also say that this series hasn't aged well, and there is quite a bit of inappropriateness in here and jokes that just would not fly today. However, considering the time that it was written, and I was around the same age as Georgia as I was reading this and the time it was written, it is a pretty accurate portrayal of what being a teenager in England was like in the early 2000s. I'm not entirely sure why I gave this one 4 stars. In terms of the humor, it wasn't as funny as some of the ones that I've read before, although you do have a lot of Dave the Laugh content in here, who is one of my favorite characters. I do definitely think that maybe, not my lack of enjoyment, because I still did love reading this, but the fact that I didn't give this 5 stars could be attributed to the fact that I listened to a 5-hour audiobook in a day, because as I mentioned, I don't really listen to audiobooks. If I have anything in my ears for longer than 2 hours, it starts to irritate me, and I also don't retain information from audiobooks very well, so I normally have to concentrate. Like, you guys always laugh at me because I listen to audiobooks no faster than 1.25 speed, but usually just on normal speed. But yeah, overall, really loved reading this again, and I'm really excited now to read the final book for the first time. Like, I'm so excited. It's been a decade and I have managed to not be spoiled for this series, which just blows my mind, to be honest. I'm not sure that I would recommend this book for a new audience, like somebody who hasn't read it before. However, if you did read this series when you were a teenager and you are thinking of rereading it, would 100% recommend listening to the audiobooks of this, because they are honestly so good, and they are also all available on Scribd. So that is it. Those are the 7 books that I have read so far in the month of July. I'm reading like the wind. I'm hoping that it can continue. However, the books that I am currently reading and the books I have left on my TBR are a little bit longer, or are a little bit more like adult high fantasy and things like that. So we'll see how I go, but I'm feeling optimistic. I want to read at least 5 more books this month. Like, that's my minimum. So I'm hoping I can get there. But that is about it for my mid-month wrap up, guys. So please let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. And if not, then let me know what your favorite book of July so far is. But that's it from me today, guys. So please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and a 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.